How do you tell a very dramatic story visually in a single frame? This challenge must have faced artists through our past when there were no videos or cinema. I thought it would be interesting to trace how storytelling evolved in ancient art and to trace the worth of a masterpiece. Hello, I'm Madhavi Sardeshpande and welcome to my channel Indian Aesthete. I'm an artist, art historian and a technology futurist. I'm passionate about art, ancient art, and I'm keen to understand how and why it was made. Today I'll trace the depiction of a story about Ravana shaking Mount Kailasa in Western Indian cave sculpture from the 5th to 8th centuries CE. It's very interesting to see how eventually this rather strange story was probably used to glorify the king who commissioned a magnificent temple. The result was a masterpiece at the Ellora caves. The story goes that Ravana, the 10-headed demon king of Sri Lanka, was travelling in the Himalayas. And in nothing short of an aircraft, the Pushpaka Vimana, taken from his half-brother who he had just defeated. As he neared Mount Kailasa, which is the abode of Shiva and his family, he found that he couldn't fly over it. Ravana confronted the bull Nandi, who is Shiva's vehicle. Nandi told him that Mount Kailasa was a no-fly zone as Shiva and Parvati were resting and couldn't be disturbed. This enraged Ravana, who was flushed with pride and arrogance from his recent victory. Ravana had some superpowers, including shape-shifting. He blew himself up in size, plucked out the mountain from the earth, and started shaking it violently. This caused a commotion on top of the mountain. Parvati clutched Shiva in fear, while her attendants started rushing away. What did Shiva do? He manifested his divine power by pressing the big toe of his foot to the earth. This exerted so much pressure that not only did it counteract the force that Ravana was applying, but also started crushing Ravana down. This event was such a wonder that gods and other celestial beings in the skies came to watch it. In the relief at the Kailasanatha Temple at Ellora, which is the subject of this episode, we are looking at this moment when Ravana is desperately struggling to move the mountain as well as to move himself out from under it. This is a masterful composition with unprecedented drama that we rarely see in any sculptural relief. Now, it's time for some historical context setting. Pashupata Shaivism was the most popular Shaivite faith in this period between the 3rd and the 9th centuries CE. We see many cave temples dedicated to Shiva all over peninsular India. These caves, intended to look like the interiors of actual temples, have relief panels that celebrate the glory of Shiva. We can see stories of Shiva's marriage to Parvati, his victory over foes, and episodes such as the descent of river Ganga on his locks. We also see him in his various forms as a yogi and a dancer. The object of worship is the linga in the sanctuary. The idea is to show that Shiva is benevolent towards his devotees, but also ferocious with those who challenge him. These stories were very much part of the popular imagination in this period, and we can see echoes in the classical Sanskrit poetry of this period. The famous poet Kalidasa in his Sanskrit poem Meghaduta refers to Mount Kailasa. Instead of calling the mountain by its name, he uses the phrase Dashab Mukha Bhujojchasat, meaning the joints of whose summits have been slackened by the arms of the 10-headed one. Other than that, I have not been able to find a description of this particular story in any early literary text. Most likely, there were poems in languages like Prakrit and Apabhransha that are lost to us today that also describe this and other stories in great detail. Now, let's get back to our story. A story that is rather difficult to narrate. How do you show a huge mountain being shaken by a demon and also depict what's happening above it in a single frame? Let's see. The earliest depiction of the scene of Ravana shaking Kailasa, to my knowledge, is at the 5th century CE Jogeshwari Cave Temple in Mumbai. It is in a very poor condition, and I'm overlaying my sketch so that you can see the very synoptic composition in a semicircular panel on top of one of the entrances to the cave temple. The mountain is just shown symbolically with a layer of rocks with all characters in place. After this, we see it in caves 21 and 14 at Ellora from the mid 6th century as full-fledged panels with far more detail. Cave 21 is particularly beautiful in its composition and the addition of many subsidiary characters. At the late 6th century cave temple in Elephanta or Gharapuri in Mumbai, we see it in one of its most magnificent forms. Although the sculpture is badly damaged, see how the sculptor has carved deeper into the wall to create a feeling of depth. The patronage of all these caves is attributed to kings of the Kalachuri dynasty, though inscriptional evidence is now lost. The magnificent Elephanta cave was such a success that in the early part of the 7th century, a king had a larger copy of the temple made in Ellora at Cave 29 called the Dhumar Lena. Sadly, this copy of the Elephanta cave and our particular story lack the vitality seen in the earlier caves. It's an uninspired imitation.
Now observe how the core story in these cave temples always has more or less the same elements.
Shiva and Parvati in the top center, flanked by attendant figures. Ravana in the lower section, shaking the mountain, which is showed in the code language of a rusticated rock-like structure.
At this time, all these stories were narrated in other visual media, including wall murals and wood sculpture, and we can see the same formulas for clouds and rocks here. As the canvas gets larger, more details appear and the sculptor gives the primary figures prominence by simply making them larger than the others.
Here's a timeline of the caves so that you get a picture of the evolution of the story.
Let's now jump to 100 years later to 750 CE to the marvel that is the Kailasanatha Temple.
It is the most magnificent among the several cave temples, Buddhist, Brahmanical and Jain, that were carved out of living rock at Ellora. Ellora has an immense rocky face interspersed with waterfalls and little rivulets that come alive in the monsoons.
Believe it or not, but the Kailasanatha Temple was excavated from the top into the mountainside rather than built from the base as a regular structural temple would be.
Ancient literary sources say poetically that the gods and Gandharvas flying above this temple commented and said that it could not have been made by humans, and that even the makers could not believe that they had created this masterpiece.
We need to take a look at the history to see how this magnum opus of a temple was conceived.
In the 8th century CE, a new power, the Rashtrakuta dynasty, rose to ascendancy in this region. They consolidated power by defeating the mighty Chalukyas of Badami and by forming coalitions with the Pallavas in the south. According to inscriptions, the second ruler of this dynasty, Krishnaraja Rashtrakuta, who reigned from 756 to 772 CE, is the king who commissioned this grand temple. Krishnaraja most likely wanted to show his contemporary what the Rashtrakuta dynasty could achieve. The Chalukyas and Pallavas had built marvelous monuments to Shiva in their capitals.
What could be more befitting than building a monument that took the best of the talents from these regions and combining them with the local talent to produce this ambitious project at Ellora? Art historians have found the stylistic signatures of at least 3 guilds of sculptors from these southern kingdoms working on the Kailasanatha simultaneously. Once you enter the temple from the gateway, many of the stories about the glory of Shiva greet you in the corridors as you circumambulate along the Pradakshina Patha. The sculptural cycles all over the temples, even its plinth with the marching elephants, have a martial feel. Naturally, we see some stylistic and compositional changes now entering the treatment of our old themes.
And there's a relief from a structural temple at Pattadakal in Karnataka from the 7th century, where Shiva and Parvati look small and insignificant, while Ravana is almost the hero. Here, the composition is dynamic and the sculptor has taken exceptional interest in detailing Ravana's heads and arms to give momentum to the scene. Look, you can see this influence from Pattadakal on a similar smaller relief on another part of the Kailasanatha temple.
Finally, we come to the magnum opus within the magnum opus. What we see at the Kailasanatha relief is the culmination of the compositional and stylistic elements, but our master artist breaks the formula and brings an intense drama and dynamism into the scene. The placement of this relief and the extra efforts put into its composition and execution indicates that it was quite special. Could we then also assume that the architect planned a sculpture at the base that would also glorify his sponsor Krishna, almost identifying him with Kailasanatha?
Usually, the reliefs in these earlier cave temples are of the depth of 3 to 4 feet at maximum because they have been carved in the interiors of caves and need to look like walls supporting a structure. The master could cleverly overcome these artificial limitations. He's chosen this spot on the exterior facade of the temple, the 25 feet high plinth, to execute this theatrical tableau, which is almost 8 feet deep or more and about 20 feet high. The use of the southern facade also keeps this relief lit up through the day and creates a dramatic play of shadows. Master artist now has ample scope to create a 3D rendition of Ravana whirling about like a giant top. While the pose of Ravana, his torso inclined, one knee on the ground, is almost identical to the previous reliefs, here, with his 20 arms at different angles and different depths, we get the impression that Ravana has actually drilled into the rock and created the hollow under Mount Kailasa. Now let's look at what's happening in the upper part of the relief. Compositionally, this is actually a scene from a drama, not an arrangement of figures. Parvati is shown half prone, as if she's just getting up from bed, startled by the tremors, and she clutches at Shiva's arms. The way her torso twists makes this not only more dramatic but adds that momentary candid photo feel to the scene. Even Shiva's half-turned pose is new. The tension in the scene is accentuated by the figure of her attendant rushing away from the scene in fear, also adding to the impression that there's more space in the shadows behind. The diagonals in the poses add movement to the composition. To match this three-dimensional feel, even the gods and heavenly beings are shown in a curved plan rather than flat against the wall. Giving stability to the whole scene are the Dwarapalas, who sit unflustered, confident of their lord's ability to deal with the situation.
You see how, over a period of 300 years, the storytelling has reached its full potential. And I would say that 150 years after the Elephanta caves were created, for the first time we see such a mastery of space and refinement of form here at Ellora. As a trained visual artist, here are some of the lessons I could learn from the way the story evolved.
Focus on the main characters. The way our Kailasanatha panel isolates and treats the main 3 figures is exemplary. See how the poses of each of them have evolved from the formulas seen in earlier compositions. Bring emotional depth through the use of movement, dynamic diagonal lines, and the play of light and shadows. These visual techniques can be seen in the Baroque art in Europe in the 17th century CE. Create a contrast of emotions by juxtaposing opposing elements in your composition. Here, we see intense motion with static poses, symbolizing distress and confidence. This ploy is also seen in plays, movies, and literature. Expand your canvas. Not every artist has the luxury to create a larger canvas and introduce new elements and more detail.
But think, if the master sculptor had played safe instead of boldly breaking the mold, he would have still created these panels like the others in interior spaces, and he would never have achieved this kind of magnificent result. The larger space also introduces a time element. The viewer gets more immersed in the story and spends more time with it. Do tell me in the comment section if you agree and what you learned from this. Here's the rest of the story.
After Ravana realized that he was trapped in a situation of his own making, he was humbled. At first, he cried out in rage, hence his name Ravana. Then he beseeched Shiva to forgive and release him. For a long time, he composed and sang hymns in the praise of Shiva. Finally, Shiva was pleased and released him and gave him a reward. This version of the story was immensely popular in South India, and we see here many versions of Ravana appealing to Shiva, hence the name Ravana Anugraha Murti. Check out these panels at Halibut and Meenakshi temples in Madurai, both from a later period. The story also became popular, and in some Southeast Asian temples you can see some excellent examples.
I hesitate to call the panels and Western Indian cave temples by that name, as Ravana always comes across as an aggressor, not as a beseecher. This was a long video indeed, and if you have stuck around until now, thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed this and you are now curious to hear more about some of the beautiful Western Indian cave architecture and sculpture. I was once working on my own incomplete PhD thesis on how this style evolved in its early phases, so I'd love to present more of this to you. I'd also like to express my gratitude towards Professor Deepak Kannal, my professor and mentor, who is the greatest expert on the sculptural analysis of Ellora caves. Having worked with him many years ago has given me the inspiration for making this video. Here's the second edition of his book that has an in-depth analysis of the enigma that is Ellora. Do let me know in your comments if you like such content, and please do subscribe and share. Thank you again for watching.